Well, hello, Maastricht. How do we live peacefully with 9 billion people? I want to talk to you about politics, because the politicians that we have today, both at the national level and at the global level, are not the politicians we need to live peacefully with 9 billion people. We need a new breed of politician, younger people with longer-term ideas that can change the world that we need to create. These two pictures are of the same person. You might recognize him. I haven't grown very much between the two of them, but when I was born just over 50 years ago, I was one of 3 billion people in the world. And when this other picture was taken on the right, when I'm taking flying lessons, I was one of 7 billion people in the world. We've seen a phenomenal change in the number of people in a very short period of time. In just 50 years, we have more than doubled the world population. And yet, for certainly most of the people I know, the world hasn't changed very much. The political systems are still much as they were 50 years ago. My father and my grandfather would recognize the sort of politicians that we have, and they'd recognize the kind of world that we live in. The change that we've seen from 3 billion to 7 billion is really very small. So it looks as if 3 equals 7. 3 billion people equals 7 billion people. But I want to show you that 7 billion people does not equal 9 billion people. That as we go up to 9 billion people, we're going to have to make some fundamental changes, and there are 3 reasons. The first reason is resources. We're going to hit a wall, a barrier, in terms of our resources as the population rises. Oil is one example. The reason that we're drilling 200 miles off the coast of Brazil, the reason that we're trying to get oil out of the tar sands of Canada, is that most of the easy-to-access oil has gone. The last major discovery of oil, the last big field, was in 1964, nearly 50 years ago. And since 1984, we've been using more oil every year than we find. So we're depleting our resources. And as we increase the population by yet another 25%, the demand for energy will rise, and oil accounts for 1/3 of our energy. Now, it's not that we have a fundamental energy problem, but that oil is essential for motor vehicles, for aircraft, for ships, and until we find a replacement, we're going to see the price of oil continue to rise, and that will affect the poor. We also have a problem with food. It's not so much that we can't grow enough, it's that we are not very good at the logistics. We grow food in India and Africa, and we can't get it to the stores. The logistics are very poor. But the other fundamental problem with food is water. There's a fixed amount of water that we can drink on the planet. And when you divide it by 7 billion people, there's already too little. And when you increase that to 9 billion, there will be even less. We also have a problem with several other of the world's resources, with gold, with silver, with copper, with zinc. We're going to hit barriers with all of these metals within the next few decades, and those will bring us problems. They will make life harder for the poor. So the first reason we have to change the way we run the world is resources. The second reason is climate change. Over the years to come, we're going to see a lot more strange weather patterns. We're going to see more droughts, more floods, more uneven harvests. We're going to see sea levels rise and people having to move away from where they want to live to places where they don't want to go and will not be welcome. And that's going to raise tensions. We're also going to see an increase of insects and bugs that are going to affect harvests as well. Now, both those things, the problems with resources and the problems with climate change, will have this effect. Unless we respond to these changes, it will bring people out onto the streets. We're talking about serious issues here, about the chance of people surviving, about life and death. And people get angry when they can't live or can't eat. There's one other factor I want to talk about, and it's called the Gini coefficient. This is a term in economics, and it measures the gap between rich and poor. It measures the equality level in society. And put very simply, when the Gini coefficient is 0, it means that everybody has the same level of wealth, that everybody is equal. And when the Gini coefficient is 100, It means that one person has all the money and all the wealth, and everybody else has nothing. Now, to put that in some sort of perspective, in Europe, the Gini coefficient in most countries is in the upper 20s. It's between 25 and 30. In sub-Saharan Africa, it often goes beyond 60. But the reason it's important is that as the number rises, as the Gini coefficient gets higher, as it gets towards 50, the alarm bells start ringing. The gap between rich and poor is too big, and you get people coming out onto the streets. It's an alarm bell for social discontent. And the genie is out of the bottle. You can see here on the far left-hand side of the screen, this is China in 1976 at the end of the Cultural Revolution. And since then, over the last 30 years, China's Gini coefficient has moved from less than 20 across to nearly 50. It's reaching the alarm bell stage. And we've seen the same in Britain and in America. America has always had a much higher level of inequality than most other countries. But America's Gini coefficient has also jumped across to the right-hand side into the danger zone, and Britain's is close behind. In the middle, by the way, in Canada, in the European Union, and in Japan, the Gini coefficient actually hasn't changed very much. The inequality level has not risen very much in the last 25 years. But at the top right, you can see countries like Mexico and Argentina and Brazil and Hong Kong and Singapore, where the alarm bells are ringing loud. The gap between rich and poor is too great, and we need to make some changes. Just to put this in perspective, the wealth of the bottom, of the poorest 3 billion people in the world today is equal to the top 793. That's how big the gap is. Again, unless we change this, we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more people coming out onto the streets, more people who are angry, more Occupy movements coming up, and we need to change if we're going to stop that happening. So, what sort of response have we got to these problems, these three problems of resources, climate change, and the Gini coefficient? How are we responding to these problems today? Well, we need to wake up the goddess of democracy and ask her what we need to do. Because these are the people we have in power. Over the last 20 years, we've had these sort of people running the world. And when I put together these photographs, I thought, my goodness, they all look as if they're laughing. They're all smiling, and there's Kevin Rudd in the middle, the Prime Minister of Australia. He looks like he's trying to suppress a giggle. And I thought to myself, well, what's so funny? And I think the answer is this. You know, we voted for these people. These people are a disaster. They have brought us a financial crisis and a debt level which will last for decades to come. They have increased the gap between rich and poor. They have brought us wars which are not in the interest of humanity. They have brought us huge levels of unemployment, particularly in southern Europe for our youth. And they have done nothing to stop climate change. We need some new leaders. We need some people with new ideas and some younger people who can look further into the future, who can make decisions in the interests of all humanity. Now, where do we find these ideas? That's really the difficult problem at this point. How do you find people with different ideas? There are places. You can see the Occupy movement. It did have a core of lots of ideas. It wanted to create change, and it wanted to create radical change. There are people here like the Prime Minister of Norway, who a few months ago pretended to be a taxi driver, so he could listen to what the people in the back thought, so he could be in touch with the normal people on the streets and understand what they wanted. There are political parties like the Reform Party in America, or the Pirate Party in Europe, or the Green Party, who have radical ideas, who want to see us change, who want to see a different world where we think about the planet and we think about the wider needs of humanity. There are people like the Club of Rome, who for 40 years have told us, stop focusing on growth. Growth is not progress. You need to think about the well-being of all the people. And we have more radical people like Anonymous, people who actually have the power through their computer networks to create change and who want to see us living in a different world. There are people with different ideas. It's up to us to focus on these people, to focus on their ideas, and elect people who can change the world. It's not just at a national level where we have this problem. We have the problem at a global level too. At a global level, our organizations are run by people like the United Nations, like the G20, the IMF, and the World Bank, and they too are failing us. Climate change. They've done nothing to fix our problems with climate change. We have a global financial crisis, the banks running wild, the corporations running wild, and they've done nothing to stop that either. We have a crisis in Fukushima in Japan. We've got hundreds of gallons of radioactive liquid pouring into the oceans, and we're leaving it up to one little company which seems to be struggling in Japan to fix this problem. This is a problem which will affect thousands or millions of people over perhaps thousands of years. It's a problem which has global implications, and we're not addressing it globally. Our global governance is failing us. It's time that we need a new dawn in global governance. We need to find new forms of organization to organize our world. We need perhaps to have democratically elected governance at the top level, but what we do need is a structure at the top where national governments are answerable to it. That a global authority can pass down rules which are in the interests of all humanity, that we can address problems like climate change from the top down. We need new leaders. We need new global governance as well. To build a bridge to 9 billion people, we need to change our politicians. We need to change them at the national level, and we need to change them at the global level. Now, how do we do that? Well, the answer is in your hands. If you live in a democracy, you vote the people into power. You can change the world. Thank you very much.